Okay, I hope my screen is visible.
Yes.
Thanks. Hello everyone, and thanks a lot, Aditya, for that wonderful start for the day. And I would like to welcome everybody once again to our 2021 Selenium Summit keynote talk. I'm Sundaresan, by the way. I'm a test architect for IBM, also a volunteer as well as a steering committee member at Agile Testing Alliance. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for the day, Maaret. Maaret, we are very lucky to have you today, and thanks a lot for joining us from Helsinki. I know it's actually early for you, but yeah, we are very excited to have you and listen to you. At the outset, we are also kind of very excited about the topic, which is exploratory testing. So I'm sure we are going to learn a lot today. So Maaret is actually a technologist. She's a tester and a programmer, an author, a speaker, and also a conference organizer. So, like I said, the topic is actually contemporary exploratory testing. Like Agile, to an extent, exploratory testing is also a misunderstood area. It's kind of a misused testing methodology as well. I'm sure Maaret's talk is actually going to take us into the right path. So I would misuse testing methodology as well. I would urge all beginners to listen carefully and experts to actually listen to the keynote carefully as well. So without further ado, over to you, Maaret.
Thank you. So let me share my screen here. Right. All set, I think.
Yes, Maaret.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, everyone. And we're going to be spending the next half an hour on the topic of contemporary exploratory testing. Thanks all the organizers of this conference. It's really great being here. And it's actually not that early today. You're starting quite late on the day. So it's a normal time for me to get started on an exciting day of work. I work as a principal test engineer in Vaisala, which basically means that about half of my time is hands-on testing in a team working side by side with the rest of the people doing the testing. But the other half goes into things around improving the organization, improving the team, teaching others. And of course, on the side of all of this, my hobby always has been teaching and sharing and kind of thinking through what testing looks like. So that's kind of the foundation of the lessons that I'm sharing for you today. I use the word contemporary in particular because I didn't want to use modern exploratory testing, which maybe would be an easier word for many of us non-English speakers like myself. I use the contemporary to say that it's really something that I find that we're looking at right now, exploratory testing, in the sense that it's been around for over 35 years. 35 years is a long, long time. But looking at it, how it's actually the kind of going back to its roots, how it's evolving into the current days, it's an important lesson for us all. And I wanted to share a little bit on that for you today. Exploratory testing, kind of introducing that at first, is this idea that it's an approach to testing. It's not a technique. It's not something you do on top of everything else, but it's like a mindset that you approach testing with. And what's important to that mindset is that it centers learning, and to center learning, it also needs to center what I call agency, this idea that, you can make your decisions, you can choose what you do. And even in the scale that you will be doing the work you do at office when you're testing, you are making choices of where you're kind of focusing your energies, what are you looking at in detail, what are you kind of skipping, where you choose either intentionally or unintentionally to leave things out because you don't know about them or how to use them. So you're making those kind of choices. So agency, centering that, your responsibility, knowing what are the options out there is central to exploratory testing. Another thing that is really core to exploratory testing is this idea of systems thinking. And when I say systems thinking, I mean that we're looking at our code that our organization is creating as part of a system. And this system is not just the code we created, but it's the code somebody else created. And it's also the people who are using that code in various ways with different kinds of ideas and goals. And we're trying to understand information in the perspective of all those different stakeholders. So it's not just kind of looking at it from the end user's perspective, using it as an end user, but it's really figuring out all the possible ways, all the possible combinations that are relevant in order to find the problems that we're looking for while testing. So finally, what I want to kind of say on exploratory testing as a definition is that I think it balances the investment to the time we use on testing in general to the results we're able to do. And the results, like we're talking about today in this talk, the results will not just be whatever bugs you're finding right now in the moment. It's also the bugs you will be finding in a year. Output of the investment into an exploratory testing, I think, is at least twofold. One is you will come out as a better tester if you're continuously learning every single day. But the second part is probably automation will play a part, and that's what we focus on today. Automation left around even when you leave your team will do some of the work you created while you were working in that team for the team after you're gone. And I think that's a really core part of how you look at the contemporary approach. So going into this, I wanted to show you a little bit of an example. Something I've been testing recently, not at office, because things that I test at office, even though I can show them, they are a little bit too big usually to go into talks. So I took a little small example of something that I've been testing with various people in a paired format, because I've been creating a new course on software testing, exploratory testing in particular, and I've been using this test target called EPrimer. And you probably don't even know what it is. And that's kind of the idea generally on going into this, that you get to learn a new domain when you're testing it. So you have to apply the central idea of learning while you're testing. There's a little link on the user interface giving you access to what I call a specification or a domain description. But it also gives you a little bit of functionality like a text box and a button to play with. And if you just kind of click or come up with your first test case, whatever that might be, click on the checking for EPrime, it also shows you some kind of output functionality. So this, as a web application, it really promises a lot for us thinking in terms of Selenium, and we are today in the Selenium Summit 21. So thinking of it as kind of like coming to this kind of an exploratory testing problem with the idea that we are able to use tools like Selenium or whatever other tools you might choose to use in the same space with Selenium, you might already be able to approach this a little bit differently. What you can probably also see from the little example there, to be or not to be, Hamlet's dilemma, causing some both red and blue on the output there. It's not like this test case that I have visible here on the screen is the first test case that you would be, or even I was likely to find when I first started exploring this. I've spent a few hours on this problem already, so for me now it's easy to choose the demo test case that kind of shows the functionalities of the application, and usually these demo type of test cases that help you see the new functionality in the best light. This is usually the stuff that you get from your developers, because they have the idea of what kind of things they think this application would be doing. But I had to, of course, come up with this example through exploring also for that, as the developer wasn't actually giving me those answers on this. Spending time, usually 1 hour at a time, on this problem, I've learned that different people definitely approach this very differently. So first of all, I spent some time with someone who isn't very keen on the automation side of things. And on exploring this, the thing they focused on is that with the little example we have here, to be or not to be, Hamlet's dilemma, there's actually not 9 words like the word count says, there's only 8 words. So learning about a bug early on your testing, I call it a bug trap. It's something where many testers starting exploratory testing fall into, that when they find a bug on some part of the application, they know that there's going to be more bugs in that particular area. So instead of kind of covering all the different functionalities, or even thinking around the term of, this is called EPrimer, maybe the 2 other lines here are more relevant to test because they're part of the domain, whereas word count you would probably have in other tools as well. It can easily steal your focus. Another trap that I see people running into is that when they start exploratory testing this with test automation first, they look at the part where you have the red and blue, and the red and blue kind of takes you to this, what I call an algorithm trap. This is going to be interesting to automate so that it's generally usable to verify. And I can spend, well, not just the hour, but even a few hours coming up with a way of turning that specification that I have accessible to me into something that I can automate against. So that's another trap that I might want to be at least aware of in this case. And a third trap that I also see, a third category of exploratory testers falling into, is that they first see that little link there, and the hour later they are still looking at the specification and just kind of, writing on a paper without having even run the application much. They're still creating test cases, all the things they could try doing, and they probably would have learned more if they didn't fall into what I call the test cases trap. So being aware of these traps, trying to do the best testing possible to find the relevant information about this application, that's the goal of exploratory testing that we have. So going into this, the way that I often find myself approaching problems like this, just to see how things go, if nothing else, is an idea that I call the Automationist Gambit. I use the word gambit, game opening, because, well, there's been the recent movie on the Queen's Gambit, the chess opening move, the particular moves that you do very early in the game to open the game to a particular setting. And I think in exploratory testing, the way you should think about automation within that is that automation and being able to do automation, being able to do Selenium automation, user interface automation, or any other level of automation, it's kind of like a possibility for you, it's knowledge for you that enables you to do this Automationist Gambit. You can open the whole exploration with the idea that actually you can execute whatever you're executing on that application that you're looking at, the testing problem that you're trying to solve. You can go already in automation first, and it's still exploratory testing. It's just the opening to that exploratory testing. So sort of going into that with the idea that test automation is documentation. So I'll show you an example. I didn't actually feel like writing Selenium today for this talk. Instead, what I did is, what I used for the course is the simplest possible form of hiding Selenium, or in this case, since I used the browser library for robot framework, hiding Playwright behind the scenes, creating a simple test case in an exploratory fashion is something that I could be doing. The first test case is my way of getting to a place where the machine is doing some of the driving for me. And even though this is just as manual as any of the other so-called manual testing that I might be doing, this form of documenting, it's not much slower to do. but it enables me knowing that the next step from this, of course, after having executed it and seeing it pass, is to extend it by more examples. And this is something that automation really enables us, that it gives us this kind of one test case, one set of inputs, and it helps us really quickly turning that documentation of that one single test case into a selection of multiple ones. And it can even do exploratory testing for us, in the sense that we never saw it fail without automation first. But when we add a test case, like in this list, test number 6 actually finds problems in this application, the automation can be and should be, as documentation, should be a part of how you're finding the problems with your application. Should be a part of how you're finding the problems with your application. Should be a part of how someone. Oh, I'm hearing some background noise, so it's me going back to cycling. So again, here, the examples are really not that relevant. The application is not that relevant. The idea is relevant, that I can use exactly the same single test case, just parameterizing it a little bit and turning it into multiple test cases. And it doesn't take me any more time to write a new line here on the list of test cases than it does to write a line in my mind map or whatever other forms of documentation I could be using. But instead, what happens when I do things this way is that I can run things, after every single test case, or I can just create as many as I like before I run them all at once, and I get some of them failing to the idea that whatever is correct actually isn't coming out of this application, so into real bugs. To build this kind of test case, to automate, actually, that's what I'm doing here. I'm writing automation. I start from a single line. It's kind of like an exploratory approach to automation. Single line, making sure my tools work, I can get that to run, all of things are fine, even today, not just with the general environment that I usually use. I can see things fail, kind of adding a few lines, going into the first asserts, whatever I am trying to verify there, make sure that it actually is doing that testing for me. I can add my first test, just like we already looked at the little example there. I can do the same test, refactor it into variables. I can do the same test, but now using templates. I can start seeing that the test fails with a bug, and we figure out what to do with the failures. Do I want to document the failures as a failing test? Do I want to comment it out? What's the goal there? So kind of like making a little bit of choices there more. I can add more things from the specification while exploring to those tests that I just created. I can guess what values are likely to fail, like the empty value. What if I put in empty? Or what if I put in a line change? By the way, that's one of those that finds a bug in this particular application. So it's not just the spec, it's also our experiences of things that usually fail with application that make sense to document in those test cases that get executed with automation. And since I documented with automation while exploring, I can then run this over multiple browsers, multiple browser versions, whatever I need for that application. And it doesn't even have to be complete before I do all of that. Depending on what's the choice of my next step, I can make different choices of these steps as I move forward. And then, of course, I can also make it run in CI, the continuous integration environment. But if I want to do that, I do not want to leave around the failing tests with the bug. I want to have some mechanism of passing them. And what I loved about my previous place of work and our automation solution that really supported this kind of exploratory fashion testing is I could, jump in at any execution. I could jump in the middle and just look at the tests running. And I could see bugs kind of like, because I had the visual of the user interfaces. It wasn't a web application, but another kind of application. I could have a visual with the user interfaces. I could see what was going on. And if I wanted, I could interject manual testing from any place where I was in that particular testing, in the middle of our CI system. And what we also had there when we were running things in CI for failing tests was this idea of best before dates for fails. So we had tests that were failing, and we said we're planning on fixing this bug within a week. So we would have that test passing for a week, and it started automatically then failing later, just to remind us of the commitment we made. So like a really nice way of integrating it into the process of doing testing in a proper, good exploratory fashion. So all of this, if I don't put it in CI, it ends up being throwaway automation, or it ends up being automation that I can run from my own computer. And that's fine too. That's a choice we can make, because when we put it in our version control and start running it in our CI, we also say that it's going to be taking a relevant chunk, probably from our maintenance time in the future. And it already did real testing for me in the scale of just running them in this way. So even if I didn't use all the different benefits that I can get in the long term, I already had some of those benefits. So again, a choice that I need to make, something that I need to learn by exploring and doing things that way. So going in with this test automationist gambit, I found some bugs in this particular case, in this particular 1 hour session that I paired with one of my colleagues. What we found is well, some specified examples that were not properly recognized. And we had the runnable test automation, the documentation available after that session. So it was the choice of that particular session. But we also missed some of the things. So other sessions that didn't start with test automationist gambit, we did those with different people. We did those with the same person. Later on, we did some of these in different orders. It's again, you don't have to open with this. You can also continue with this kind of an idea. We also found that, for example, if you put large text there, it just doesn't even fit on the screen, and it takes a little bit more of checks to get that into automation, that it would notice that the scrolling is missing. And that was something that we also investigated and learned, that the version that I created with the styles that I wanted to use was what created that. But the bugs, they are not so relevant, but the idea that most likely writing documentation, whether it's manual, traditional test cases, or these automation-oriented test cases, it's going to be slowing you down a little bit. So you will be making this balanced choice between the two. So what you're doing, what am I showing here, is that you're actually choosing your own constraint. That's the core of exploratory testing. You get to make those choices, what constraint you have in mind. Your constraint could be that I want to come out of this session, this 1 hour, this 1 day of work. I want to come out of it with documentation that is executable, and I can leave it behind for my future self. And that's useful. You can go with the idea that I want to be able to tell my developers as quickly as possible all the core problems that I can find within a limited amount of time. Or you can go with the idea that you think you've already done pretty much everything you need to do, and imagining that maybe there's still something more you could find. And exploratory testing is inviting you into thinking of the constraints that you go in with. I have 3 rules on how to choose your constraint. My first rule that I suggest to people is to never ever being bored. If you feel bored when you're testing, you probably need to change something. So even the most boring things, repeating the same recipe with automation, without it, either way, you should never be bored. You can make changes, little tweaks in order of things, and you will serendipitously find new kinds of aspects in yourself, but also in the application that you're testing. The second of my rules here is that you should be really well aware which options expire. So for example, if you're invited to test 1 week before a major release, probably finding certain bugs, certain things that would be too big to react to, that just need to be accepted at that point, it's not the best use of your time. So being aware of that helps you choose where you focus on. And in that case, when you end up in a big project just a week before, maybe the documenting with automation isn't the first thing that you should use as your constraint. Also, some options expire just because you can do this first and this one after. So for example, the first experience you have on an application when you're kind of like the regular user that doesn't know anything about it, you can only have that before you read the specification, before you have the conversation with the developers, and get all the good examples of how do you best use this application. So if you want to bring those pieces of feedback into the way that you do testing, the feedback you're able to give, you need to be aware that doing something else will take those options away from you. And again, playing with the order of things is what you do in exploratory testing. And thirdly, in choosing your constraint, my third advice is this idea that collaboration is a skills wildcard. You probably are people here who know something about Selenium, and writing Selenium might be either something you're just getting started with, or it might be something that is really kind of well in your toolbox already. But finding someone else with a different skill set, if you're a newbie, finding someone who's more senior in Selenium, if you're senior in Selenium, finding someone who looks at testing from the newbie's perspective, it will bring you a different set of eyes, and you are able to approach the application that you're testing a little differently. So definitely consider that as an option. You don't have to have all the skills yourself. Pairing and ensembling is a great way of doing things. But what I then consider a bad constraint is things that you shouldn't let kind of to stop you is this idea that if you focus only on what your team coded, what your team implemented. And as an example of this systems thinking perspective, I like using this particular one that is very much topical right now, even contemporary, you could say, that if you look at Signal as an application, it might be secure as it is, but if the operating system it runs on isn't, you can't really say that the system, quality-wise, is secure, and you need to evaluate it as a system. And this is how we think in terms of looking at an application from a systems perspective. So not just what we implemented, not just that, but what it runs on, what's the environment that it runs in, is just as relevant. So all of these examples, I've been really playing with that particular application with this idea that I've been creating a basic course on what kind of different constraints you could try. You could try the moment of first impression. You could try focusing on the learning the domain with the specification. You could just focus on functionality. You could focus on data. You could focus on the execution environment. You could focus on the way you document, what is the constraint on documentation. And all of these create a little bit different looking 1 hour sessions of exploratory testing. The course will be available sometime later, not yet around, but right now I'm still working on the pairing sessions, and particularly working with Irja Strauss and Parveen Khan on those ideas. And these kind of, ideas of how do we get more versatile ideas on approaching applications is what we do with exploratory testing. So going back to summarize contemporary exploratory testing. I find that in the past we've looked at exploratory testing as this idea that it's kind of like just going and opening an application, playing with it, and maybe structuring that into some kind of time slots. But what it actually has been saying in the past about exploratory testing is that knowing opportunity cost, and maybe not knowing the automation tools, or maybe even having automation tools that were not easy to use as documentation, it becomes then natural. Also, applications that are really difficult to test kind of go into the same category. All of these obstacles make us slower if we bring automation in. So what we're actually seeing with most exploratory testers is saying that they focus first, because of opportunity cost, on the test execution, because repeating the same thing, just narrow scope, it kind of like, making you create these reusable structures. It takes away from the width that you can do. And on the automation side, automation specialist side, usually going into the same problem, same kind of application, you go with the idea of focus on repeating test execution to capture it. And well, repeating exactly is then valuable so that you can add more into that mix. But these are actually getting both together. And we also need to understand that in modern days, you can't explore without automating, and you can't automate without exploring. When you have an automated test that is failing, it's like an invitation for you to go and dig out what's failing now in the system. So on top of documenting, which is kind of the first thing, the Automationist Gambit that you get on a new application for exploratory testing, you also get extending reach, getting you to alert, to attend to something that is now failing. You don't always have to be doing all of those analysis yourself, but you can continue where the automation left you. And it's guiding you when you're creating automation while you're exploring. It's guiding you to detail, because while you might be okay with some of the details that you don't know, automation needs to be told very precisely what to check and what's the right thing and what's the wrong thing. So that guiding to detail, I found more problems sometimes exploring with automation than without it, for this reason. I find that this message that I'm here to deliver you today is that all these different roles that we have are actually doing exploratory testing, and it's not a technique you add on top, but it's a mindset you go into the activity with. I've had test automation programmers who don't think of themselves as doing exploratory testing, but actually do it and doing brilliant jobs. But I've also had test automation programmers kind of implementing somebody else's test case, not feeling the agency of testing, being responsible for that testing happening. And to grow as professionals, to grow as valuable people, providing information with no matter tools we bring into our projects, we need to get away from that. But also, same with the traditional exploratory testers, if you look at it that way, is that leaving out automation and not seeking automation through collaborating with someone who knows that side well is also taking away some of the value that you could have in long term. And all of us, different roles together, I think we're doing testing nowadays together because it's way too important in projects these days to be left only for testers. So that's what I had for today, and I'd like to take some questions at this point.
Thank you, Maaret. Those who have questions, can you please raise your hand and then unmute yourself? Or you may post your questions on chat.
Yeah, Maaret, this is Aditya here. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So, Maaret, a wonderful presentation, and you really talked about how automation can help. I just want to understand that from a tool perspective, I saw that your program also talks about Robo framework. Any specific reason that you have chosen Robo, or any other tool is okay for exploratory testing for automation? What is your opinion there?
So yes, any tool is actually available. Most of my exploration I do on unit test level. Whatever unit testing framework happens, pairing with developers. I just can't put all of the examples into one talk. Using Selenium with any of the programming languages works just fine. The reason why I use robot framework here is that a lot of times I find myself talking to audiences that have never written automation. And being able to teach them in an hour how to do automation on that level, and then move them to real programming languages out of robot framework as quickly as possible. It's like one of those steps of how you grow people into becoming comfortable with automation. So robot framework is not my choice of tool as such, but it seems to be one of those where newbies to this area can very easily read what the idea of the test is and don't get confused with the code that is around.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Maaret.
We have Sharana Basappa. Sharana, if you have a question, can you please unmute yourself and ask?
Yeah, hi Maaret. So just I wanted to know that is there any manual test cases are necessary for developing your automation test script for exploratory testing?
So again, it really depends on the project that you're running on, if you write any traditional type of test cases or if you create a mind map first. And it really depends mostly on what the project is asking for, but also on what you as a tester feel that you need. I read test automation, I read code quite naturally, so I am not missing the English looking text as such. So, and I have colleagues, well, I work in R&D, I have colleagues who can all read code around me or learn to read code. So in that case, I don't really need the traditional type of test cases. I can just generate all that I need out of the code, putting in some, well, if you work in Java, like Javadoc type of things, you can just generate that stuff out of there as, you know, documentation that someone else can read without most of the code. So kind of keeping it all close to the code is what I would generally choose. But then some cases in my current organization, for example, we still can't put everything in automation. It's way too slow, or well, sometimes even not possible within the current choices that we've made. And then it's a natural place to kind of like go and document wherever our test cases used to be. But there's a lot less of that documentation, and we definitely don't overlap those. So it's this or that format.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank
So
you.
we have Josley, George. Can you please unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, hi Maaret, Josley here. I like to ask one question. So how do you recommend doing exploratory testing? Do you think it has to be done in the start and then go at the next phase of automation, or would you recommend it to be like a parallel activity along with automation?
So my projects that I work with are agile projects, incremental, continuously adding more features. So what happens first and what happens after, it's a really fuzzy concept when you're doing things day to day continuously, and things are changing. Kind of like things overlap so much that I would say I'm doing things in an intertwined way. What I though find I'm usually using as the most common recipe is that when we kick off a new feature, at that point, I draw a picture of automation interfaces I want. So to get the testability in, because again, using only the user interface and especially using user interface without good proper selectors, that's not a thing that I recommend anyone to do, and I would not go about that. So when we're kicking off the new feature, kind of like understanding what's the scale of that, what kind of things we're doing, I address those automation related concerns there. I find that I usually spend time, I would say, kind of like attending and being in an attended mode and exploring with the application, with the API, whatever we are making those changes on first, and then documenting after. But I do also stretch myself with this idea that, you know, on some days I just don't do things in the same order as I did yesterday because it's boring. So sometimes I go with the automation first, and sometimes I go with the let's understand deeply first. But eventually I need to decide on when am I done, and I believe both of these should be done at an end of a proper testing done in an exploratory fashion. Again, most of us limit based on time. We don't have time to automate everything. And the other one is skill. When you don't have the skill and you have to build the skill while you're doing this, it definitely takes you more time.
Thank you.
Cool. So we have one more question from Rasika. The question is, is there a way that unit test cases can be modified to generate good functional test cases?
Well, that's one of the ways. When I explore on the unit test level, I find myself I approach things a little differently. So unit tests in general are for developers to express their intent, especially in test-driven style. But when I go and use those as a starting point for exploration, I use them as drivers, kind of like, the same way Selenium is a user interface driver, the unit test cases are a driver to whatever functionality the developers have created. So I find myself using the parameterized features a lot more. And also, I like using things like approval testing, where I can see the whole output in a visual, text representation way on the unit test level when I'm exploring, because what I look for is, the serendipity, the lucky accident of finding something that wasn't what I intended, but I got lucky because I could see something that I didn't quite know that I was looking for. So learning to think in this way, where you're not just going for whatever you had planned, but you are going to a direction and having the open attitude to seeing all the beauty around you. That's basically what we do in exploratory testing, is how I go about in the unit testing side. And pairing with a developer with this mindset, that's usually a great way of getting started with that.
Cool. I think we have 1 more minute for a quick question. This is from Apur Mishra. The question is, exploratory testing should be a part of function testing, or should it be taken into account separately?
So for me, if you think of kind of like, you look for the boxes on what's outside and what's inside. For me, exploratory testing includes functional testing, it includes security testing, it includes performance testing, it includes accessibility testing. And some of the best problems I find in all of these different boxes, functional, non-functional, all of that, kind of like using tools, I find it when I'm in the exploratory mindset. So what I'm suggesting is, instead of trying to put exploratory testing inside the box of Selenium functional testing, instead of trying to think of it that way, think of it as a box that is outside it. So it's the mindset on how you use those tools to maximize the results and the value that you can create for your organization. You coming out better out of the test session that you just did, and you being more skilled tomorrow, that's one of the major outputs that we're looking for in exploratory testing.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I think we are at the top of the hour. May I just go ahead and share my screen for a quick word of thanks. Thanks a lot, Maaret. The session was really enlightening. Yeah, and you can actually see the number of feedback that we have been getting on our channel. We learned a lot, and especially there's always this confusion between how do we kind of take the exploratory testing into the whole new gamut of automation testing that we are seeing today. And from your session, I did learn about how to keep an executable documentation with the automation that we have, while kind of marrying the exploratory, the best practices of exploratory testing as well. And then also how to kind of use that as a leverage to help developers, and also be aware of which options that will experiment. That's something that I think most of us fail to practice on our day-to-day testing. So that's something that I'm going to take it as a great tip back to my work. And I'm sure that's something that also will help in kind of planning and aligning our releases also well. And thanks for all the summary that you gave towards the end. It's a brilliant session. We loved the keynote, and I hope the community is excited for having got a wonderful takeaway for the day.